I'm John. Welcome to my first video for this course. So we're going to be looking at a bunch of examples. First on errors. When you get an error message, how do you understand what it means and fix the problem? Second, we're going to look at a few programming tips that should help you when you're writing your own code. So here's our first example. Let's run it and see what happens. It starts to print out this message about the volume of a cube, but then has a name error saying that volume is not defined. Okay, and it highlights the problem line here, where in fact we are using the function named volume to do our computation. But where did I define volume? Well, I didn't. I defined volume cube. Okay, here I should be calling volume cube. So let's fix that. Okay. So now let's run it again and make sure, oh, whoops, we have another name error. This time I used the name SIDDE here in this line instead of the variable name SIDE, side. Okay, so a typo here. Okay. So running it, finally it works. So notice that we get a name error when we misspell either a function name or a variable name here. And don't have a definition of that name. All right, let's see what happens with this next example. We'll run it, and well, once again, we get a name error here. Name random is not defined. So, well, we're trying to use random.randrange to roll a die. What's the problem here? Well, here, let's go to the documentation. Okay. And we can scroll down here to the random module, and it tells us, well, yes, random.randrange is right, but whenever we need to use it, well, yeah, import random, we forgot that, and it tells us up here, you know, whenever we're using anything from this module, import random. We forgot to do that in our code here, so let's add that. Yeah, we didn't provide that definition of random, that it's a module here. So let's try this again, running it, and it works fine. It rolls our dice, and each time we get a different value for our pair of die. In this example, we want to compute the volume of a sphere. Let's see what happens when we run it. We get an attribute error. Module object has no attribute pi. Well, we're using math.py, and I'm importing math correctly. So what's the problem? I thought pi was defined. Let's go to our docs, and we've got a little delay on load right now. Let's search for pi, and there we go. There's math.py, but it's lowercase. Okay. All of our names are case sensitive, so I misspelled this, and anytime you misspell the part after the period, that's going to give you an attribute error. So changing that and rerunning, it now works. In this example, we want to calculate the area of a triangle. So, well, we get a type error. Area triangle takes exactly 2 arguments, but 1 was given. So let's look at our function call, which is here, area triangle B. Well, in fact, I did give it 1 argument instead of the 2 that it's expecting. I forgot to pass in H, so let's add that. Okay, and rerun. I get another type error. But it at least is different. We fixed that one problem. Type error can't multiply a sequence by non-int of type number. All right, let's see what it's complaining about. Okay, so I am doing a multiplication like it's talking about, as we need to in this formula. But what's going on? So let's look up at what's actually being printed out. And it says the area of the triangle with base 5 and height 2 plus 2 is... The height should be 4. Why isn't it adding 2 plus 2 there to get 4? Well, the problem is we have strings here, not numeric expressions. This is simply the string 2 space plus 2. It's not a mathematical expression resulting in 4. So that's why this is resulting in multiplying a sequence because, well, it's trying to multiply a sequence base, which is a string, and a string is a kind of a sequence, by something that's not an integer. Well, height here is also not an integer. Turns out you can actually multiply strings in an integer, but that's a whole separate thing, separate operation. Okay, so let's just get rid of the double quotes here. Turn these into mathematical expressions and rerun, and we get what we want. So next here we have a little function that's supposed to simply check whether we're giving it Mary, and if so, it gives us a message that yes, it has Mary, otherwise no. Okay, so let's try running this. Okay, syntax error, bad input on line 1, quote, and then quote down here on the next line. Okay, so it tells us there's a syntax error, where it is, roughly on what line. Okay, and the fact that, well, it's trying to tell us here that it's at the end of the line, where it's encountering a new line. Okay, and so here it's just kind of giving us a new line there. Okay, so that is hinting that it must be at the end of the line here. And in fact, we forgot to put the colon on here. Remember, every function header ends with a colon, just like every if here ends with a colon, else ends with a colon. Anytime that you're going to start a block of code. Okay, so fix that. Let's see it run now. Oh, another syntax error. Bad input on line 2 now. Okay, we have if x is equal to Mary. There's something wrong with that equals. What's wrong with that equals? Yeah, let's go back to the documentation here, and we could, let's try comparing things. Let's see, where would I find something about comparing? So comparison operators there. Let's see. Oh, the comparison here is double equals, not single equals. Okay, very common mistake. Single equals is assigning a variable. Double equals is comparing two things. Okay, so let's try this again here. Oh, name error. Name Mary is not defined. Oh, okay. Yeah, down here I gave it, well, Mary is not defined. I meant to pass in just a string. Okay. Here, note that, note the color. Okay, this is kind of useful here. So in this code here, where we have some strings, note the strings are color-coded red, and this is not color-coded red. It's just black like any other name. And, well, notice over here we actually have purple stuff too for keywords. Okay, notice when you're typing whether things are turning out the color that you wanted. Okay, and so here, basically just another kind of syntax error. I meant to give it a string instead of a variable name. So let's see if I'm good now. Oh, good. It found Mary, and then Fred, well, is clearly not Mary. So fixed it. So let's turn to the issues of code style and readability now. So just trust me and that this code actually works. So we have some code. What does it do? Def area ABC and some math here. Not really clear. You might not know this formula. If somebody else is looking at this code after you've written it, they don't know what you meant probably. And in fact, if you're looking at this a month after you wrote it, you might not remember either. So what should we have done? We need to provide more information to actually explain what's going on here. The first thing is, what is this supposed to be doing? Okay, let's make that clear. So this is actually supposed to calculate the area of a triangle. Okay, so let's give it a more useful name, area of a triangle, and I'm going to call it area triangle SSS to be short that it's taking 3 sides. Okay, and so, well, no matter how long a name can be, You don't want to make it too long. It gets just kind of unwieldy. You can provide more information in what Python calls a documentation string or a doc string. And in Python, that traditionally goes right here, right after the function header, and it's put in a string. Okay. Even though this is just a string, we traditionally put it in three quotes, three double quotes. What the three double quotes allows is that it allows the string to go over multiple lines. Okay. Now, what should go in a documentation string? You should talk about what are the inputs, what's the output, and how those relate. So here we could say, for example, that this returns the area of a triangle given the lengths of its three sides. Okay. Now, the documentation string tells you what it does not tell you how it actually does that. Okay. So we've got some weird math here. You might recognize it, you might not. Okay. It's actually a standard formula known as Heron's formula. Okay. So I'm going to write that down. You know, somebody can look up Heron's formula and say, aha, you actually typed in Heron's formula correctly. Okay, well, I'm going to put this in a comment. A comment starts with one of those hash signs or pound signs. Okay, and note that I'm not putting this in the documentation string. Okay, this is different. This is telling somebody how I'm calculating this as opposed to what I'm actually calculating. Okay, so that's already better. Somebody could understand, given the English and the better name, what's going on. But still, let's improve this here. A, B, C, you know, those are kind of poor names. What are those supposed to be? They're supposed to be sides. But let's make this clear. Let's rename them side 1. And I'm going to add in some spaces for readability too. Side 2 and side 3, and be sure to do that consistently. All right, and similarly, S, well, it's kind of a weird name. What is that? Well, if you add up the three sides of a triangle and divide by 2, what is that? Okay, adding up the three sides, that's the perimeter. Divide by 2, that's half of a perimeter. In other words, it's the semi-perimeter. Okay, so that's why it's traditionally called S. Let's actually give it a longer name called semi-perim, you know, more descriptive. Add a couple more spaces in here for readability and rename consistently here. Okay. Be sure of the consistency. Now, one thing you can see that's not very readable is now I have a really long piece of code, a really long line. Well, you can break that up. Okay. Notice the indentation. So I have the one formula within the square root that's broken up on 4 lines, so it's more readable, and in fact they stack on top of each other, 4 things that I'm multiplying. So this is definitely a much more readable version, and somebody could read this and understand what's going on. So this little program here is supposed to tell us, you know, what is the favorite thing of our various instructors. So Joe loves games, that's this course. Scott loves ties, as you should be seeing from his videos, and I love the outdoors, but, well, I'm here in front of a computer all the time. So, well, let's run it, and, well, it reports that I love the outdoors, but, Jeannie, my wife, who's not an instructor, none? Where's that none coming from? Well, first of all, you know, note that because Jeannie is not one of these options, it doesn't meet one of these branches here. It just follows through, and at the end of the function, there's nothing left to do, so it just returns a special value called none, which signifies that there's no value there. Okay. Now that seems kind of strange, and in particular in a larger program, if this was just a piece of some larger thing, you'd probably have a hard time tracking down where the problem was. Okay, so we'd like to have some way of saying, hey, something's wrong here. You gave me an invalid input that I wasn't expecting. And so here is one really simple way of doing it. Just make sure that each of your ifs has an else case. Okay, else, okay, some other value of instructor is here. Let's print out a message. Favorites saw invalid instructor, and here's our value G, instructor. And so we can run that, and it gives us this message saying, hey, this function saw an invalid input, now I know where to look and where the problem was.